Good morning. It is very early. I'm getting ready to pack up and go. So I'm getting a jump start on the week. So over the last day or so, I've had a conversation with a friend privately who's asking me some questions about Warlock. He had watched my recap and was curious about a couple things. Great conversation. So for those of you who don't know, I've been playing a lot during the quarantine and discovered a couple of things about myself, but about my preferences for gaming. Again, this is not about better, this is preferences, right? So this is what I dig. And in using, when I first returned, was able to play in a sort of Wizardry Continual light game. Greatly appreciated that as a player. And then ran a few D20 and a few, games. And discovered those Malthouse minimalist role-playing games, the D6 games, IDW and AIA. And absolutely fell in love with what that does live at the table for the GM and the player. And that led me to scrutinize even more my preferred D&D, BX, growing up, Sword and Wizardry, etc. And what it is about those that I love, and how that inspires a particular style of play from players, as well as GM interaction or DM interaction. But what that also seems to create in both players and GMs, but also what that seems to create in procedures that I don't really necessarily want to be a part of anymore. So the question that led to this conversation was, in having watched and listened to my recap, wanted to know, a couple things. Why so many roles? Why did Katie and Brian make so many roles in that session, and Phil and Josh did not? And well, the first thing I had to clarify was this was a 7-hour session, so we played a long time. They did a lot of banging around the sewers, and a lot of banging around in the city, and a lot of conversation with people, and then of course they spent. We literally described their cavern crawl, being lost for days. We took our time, so we were in no hurry. The pacing utterly different. We knew we had as much time as we wanted. Anyway, but there were a couple things that again, I don't know if Warlock inspires this. The book says plainly, like all these books say, ask for roles only when something's on the line. But I don't treat it that way, and I'll explain to you why I didn't treat it that way with Katie and Brian. So these are two things that worry me about games that are skill-based. One, you have to use them. That's why they're there, right? It's skill-based. They wouldn't have an itemized list of things if it wasn't necessary to challenge those things, number one. Regardless of what the rule book says, you don't have to make rolls. Well, no. True, but okay. Second, player activity. And I'd only ever played with Brian. And Brian had played with our little group, our cultural play, very active role players who narrate what they're, they declare action and they narrate. And then we call it a roll when something's in jeopardy. But the more active you are, the better chance, especially if you're trying to manipulate play, or you're trying to affect change in the world, or a change on the NPC, or a change in the circumstances, you need to make a roll. Generally, that's the way I see it. But, so there's a couple of things here. One, I didn't know these people and how they would traditionally play. Two, if they were very active and actually asked or called upon rolls, versus me just saying, you know what, make a roll. And that occurred a lot with Katie. Again, these were primarily Pathfinder and D&D 5th edition players. I think they're accustomed to the skills. They're accustomed to asking, can I make a perception check? Can I use my history lore here? Can I do this thing? Or, hey, I want to bargain with this guy. Wink, wink. I want to bargain with this guy. Fine, make a bargain roll. So when they would request a roll, whether they needed to or not, if they asked for it, they got it. And that's not a way of punishing players. That's a way of saying to them, if this is how you get your thrills, if this is how you want to play, if you want to activate that bargain skill of 4, more power to you. Good luck. And so there was a lot of, in a way, requests or nods. Can I do this thing? Or I want to use my skill, or I want to do this thing. And so, I see that as a player trying to play, and I'm not going to punish them for that. And so there are roles. So that's number 1. Number 2, it was a new system for me, and I'm not accustomed to running games that are just skills. I mean, this has no attributes. It's straight skills. So that was kind of an explanation of why they rolled. And I don't know if that's a lot in 7 hours. I think she rolled 12 to 14 non-combat rolls. He rolled, I think, 9 or 10. And then Phil 2 and Josh 4, I think. So, considering Phil rolled only twice all night outside of combat, this was quite literally the difference between somebody being active and somebody being reactive, and it was quite literally the difference between somebody requesting the use of a skill versus somebody who would say something pointed, and then it might prompt a roll or not prompt a roll. So this brought about the conversation that despite GM style or player style, because again, here's an example of 4 people at the table, 3 of which I'd never met before, and Brian, we can see how these 4 types of players can play and be successful. And then how the GM handles all 4 types of different players. But what it evolved into conversationally was, well, what is it as a GM that ultimately I want? And ultimately I need the rules to do. And why is it that, when you cut your teeth at 7, 8, 9 years old on homes, and then you get, you begin to understand what you're doing by 81, 82, I was 11 or 12, and I began to understand how this thing worked. And then that's what you play for, most of my career, right? On and off, some version of it. And so it brought me around to, well, how did I get here, right? How did I get to trying all these different games, and how did I get to using Warlock the other night instead of Sword and Wizardry Continual Light or IDW, which I've boasted is all I would ever need again to play. And I've been working on my own game. But as I told Dell, even in that conversation, I wish I had written IDW, and I wouldn't be working on what I'm working on now, right? So the gist of it is this: if we have a method to challenge, we have a method to determine a challenge, and there's a rule for that, we're good to go. If there's a potential risk reward and we don't have a rule for it, and it's fair by using an attribute score or a die 6 check that's based on some other rule in the book, we have a legitimate let's play, and most players at the table will feel as fair. For instance, to give you an example, I'm going to use my iron spikes. So in the dungeon, we're going to force the dungeon door shut, and I'm going to use my iron spikes to nail the base of this door shut so the monsters can't come back through behind us. Awesome. Do they make a roll? No, they don't make a roll. They use their tools, right? That's what the tools are for. The tools are there so they can say, hey, I'm using my rope and my crowbar to do the thing. I'm using my spike, my iron spikes, and my hammer to do a thing. They nail it shut. Well, 2 hours into our session, monsters approach them from behind. And Joe says, wait a second, dude. I nailed my iron spikes into the door. And I say, yes, you did. And it was effective. And they had to make an open doors roll, just like you would have to make if you were going through a dungeon door. Joe's strength is 17. His open doors check is a 1 to 4. If you came to a blocked door, Joe would have to make an open doors check 1 to 4. He would kick this door in. He would break this door in. Well, the monsters are getting the same luxury. They get to make an open doors check against your spikes. Now, maybe that means only a 1 or a 2. Maybe it means only a 1. But the point is, they can still breach that door. There's no guarantees. But I don't make the player roll to see whether that door is breachable or not. He hammers the spikes in. He's made it. He's forced the monsters to have to breach the door. That's the point of the tools. Not make a roll to see how well you use the tools. Right? No. I want the players to know they are skilled. I want the players to know they can act upon their ideas. Right? And this is one of the things that always, forever, I'm scratching my head when I'm a player in these games and I say, hey, I'm going to break out my rope and my crowbar and I'm going to climb to the top of the tower. And they say, well, the tower's 50 feet high. Great, my rope and hook are 50 feet. I fling it up and I'm going to climb to the top. We'll make a roll. Why would I make a roll? I'm using a rope and crowbar. Rope and grappling hook. I would make the roll if I didn't have the rope or the grappling hook. But I have the tool, so I should be able to now, how quickly I make the climb. Do you see my point? When somebody says, I'm going to light a torch, you don't ask them to make a roll to light a torch. They light the freaking torch. Right? The torch can be affected by the world. The torch can be affected by time. The torch can be affected by wind. The torch can be affected by dropping it in the water, etc., etc., etc. But the torch, the player activates it via his want or her want. Okay. So in the skill-based game like this with 25, 20, 30 skills on the page and they all have a rating in it and somebody's purposely bringing it up and saying, hey, I want to use my bargain here, or hey, I'm bargaining, wink wink, or I'm going to use my climb skill or whatever, then we're in a position where if they are calling it out, I'm going to let them roll it generally, right? Unless there's literally no need. They're wasting our time. Okay, so anyway, back to my original point. So IDW says, here's these 4 attributes. They inform every possible need to resolve any possible problem, whether that's a brains problem, whether that's a physical problem, whether that's a spiritual problem, whether that's an agility problem. Whatever could come up and play, that character, that's their chance to effect change upon the world or to survive a circumstance or to create a circumstance. That's all we need, and that's minimalist role-playing. So we swing back around to D20, and I say, what is it I love about D20? Well, I love it because I'm comfortable with it. I've run it so much. Second, there's lots of rules in the D20 old school D&D that can be flipped around and used for other resources. For instance, bargaining. There is no bargaining. There's charisma. Charisma is a modifier, and we have reaction checks. So what do you use when they want to barter or bargain? Instead of a barter rating or a skill, you use the charisma. You use the reaction check with a charisma modifier. I can modify it based on circumstances. I can modify it based on friendly or foe. I can modify it based on charisma. I can modify it based on the player's ability to role play and be convincing. And I make a reaction check. That becomes their bargain roll. That becomes their negotiation check. That becomes their intimidation check. That becomes their charm check. Right? So we have these little tools that can be flipped around and used in multiple ways, like nailing spikes to bar the door becomes open doors for monsters on the other side, right? It's just now they have to open doors as opposed to just push this dungeon door open. They get to make their 1 to 2 roll, or their 1 roll, or their 1 to 4 roll. Okay. To me, that's intuitive, but I've done it for 35 years. But here's the big difference, and this is what I was trying to get to in this video. The moral of this story, the point of this video. I enjoyed Warlock immensely. It is one of my favorite games now, in just the reading and then playing. What I don't want to see is lots of dice rolls. What I don't want to see are players involved in the character sheet, which is what certainly Katie and Brian were. I want them playing. I want them in space. I want them thinking, wow, we got a locked door here, huh? And they think they look at their backpack and say, well, I've got a crowbar. I think I'm going to use this crowbar to break this lock open. Okay, cool. That's open doors. We'll give you a +1 for a crowbar. So your open doors is now 1 to 5. Bam, doors broke open. Busted the lock. Doors open. It's that simple. But I want them acting and thinking from the perspective of their character, right? And that's hard to do when you haven't memorized 25 skills. And it's hard for the GM, knowing for me, there's 25 skills over there I need to probably be aware of so I can call it into play or acknowledge that there is a skill. These become cumbersome. These become burdensome until you've had a chance to build a culture of play and you've had a chance to get comfortable with that system, right? So it's not an indication of good system, bad system. It's not an indication of best, worst. It's an indication of preferences and comfort. But more importantly, it does inspire a particular type of play from both the GM and the players, and that you can find a good, comfortable, common ground. But to get back to the moral of this video, when I play D&D or I run D20, the White Box, for instance, a few weeks ago, Island of Sewell, hopefully I'll run it again this upcoming Friday night, the 29th, they aren't going to be making lots of rolls. They're going to be declaring their actions. They're going to be characters in a space doing a thing. And they will be forced to make a roll when there's truly something on the line. When there's truly, wow, we just don't have an answer to that. You're going to have to roll a d6, and we're looking for a 1 or a 2 here. Or you know what, you better make a save here to jump this pit. Or you know what, what you need to do is do this in a certain amount of time. So all 3 of you make die 20 checks and see if you can get this done in an hour as opposed to 6 hours. There's nothing wrong with those kind of checks, right? But they come up rarely, and they come up based on the need for success/failure, right? People often talk about this fell forward state, which I'm not a big fan of because D&D doesn't require it, right? So when someone says, wow, what about fell forward in D&D? And I say, why? You only need to roll in D&D to decide whether there is pass or fail. So why would you ask for a roll at all if there's such thing as a fell forward state? Well, there are in other games, but in D20, we won't make the roll unless it matters whether you pass or fail, and that's a significant difference that we don't acknowledge enough, right? I'm only asking you to roll because it matters if you pass or it matters if you fail, right? And generally, the pass is predetermined. I want to open the door. Oh, make an open doors check. We already know what the pass is. He's going to open the door. Right? There should be no surprise in his pass. And the fail state should be the door doesn't open. Right? Now it's what else are you going to do if you fail to open this door? How else are you going to affect change upon this door? Right? And hopefully that's on somebody else in the party's head. Hopefully they decide another route through, and he doesn't just keep trying to open doors over and over and over. And hopefully a GM will find a way to nix that mentality. Or again, why are we just rolling dice? So the argument is yes, but fell forward, lets them get that door open. We don't get stuck at that point and just make a monster on the other side of the door for the failure. Do it all the time. Excuse me, I've done it before, and I do it in certain games all the time. Right? Okay. So it comes back around to why do we roll the dice? We roll the dice when it's a challenge. We roll the dice when there is a pass-fail consequences. We roll the dice when we don't know, right? When somebody says to me, Jason, is there a torch sconce in this room? And I'm like, I look and I think, gosh, I don't have torches in. Never thought about it. You know what? I'm going to roll one odds. There's a sconce in here. Evens there is not. 50-50 chance there's a wall sconce for your torch in this room. And everybody says, okay, that's fair. At least you're not, telling me no, right? You're not saying no, absolutely not. So the conversation, fascinating, but it also made me stop and reflect. What is it I liked about Warlock? Simplicity, ease of play. What I didn't like was living with their headspace on the skill chart, asking for so many rolls, which I don't want to do 90% of the time. But that can be adjusted as I play more. That can be adjusted as the players get used to their skills, and as the players get used to not asking. The problem with skills is players tend to want to use them, right? They tend to want an excuse to say, boy, I can't wait to use my arcane lore. I got +8, my arcane lore. Please, GM, give me an arcane lore check. And then you look at something like Holmes. And for me, that simplicity as a GM and a player is paramount to my joy in imaginative space, because I'm not limited by what I'm looking at. Matter of fact, I'm liberated by what my imagination can dream up, as this fighter with a crowbar, a rope, some torches, a water skin, and a shovel can do. And that's not limited by a set of skills, and it's not limited by, I'm only limited by the quality of equipment. I'm only limited by my own creativity, so to speak. Now the challenge will be brought about by the GM saying, ooh, great, you have a shovel, but this is stone floor, it's going to take a while. Here's the thing, you can dig the hole, it's going to take you 2 hours to do it, but you're going to make one roll to see if the shovel breaks on this stone floor. If the shovel breaks, you won't be able to dig the hole. Let's make a roll. If you don't roll a 1 and you roll a 1, damn, your shovel breaks. You get about 18 inches into the ground. You break the shovel into the head of the shovel busts and bends into pieces. You're not going to be able to finish this job, right? The failure is not the player. The failure is the tool, right? My character didn't fail to dig the hole. The shovel failed, right? Because it just isn't the right tool for these circumstances, or it could be if everything goes just right. So anyway, so then again, the simple question as we discussed this, and it came back around to the final question: what is it would make me run Warlock or play Warlock consistently? I couldn't get from my Sword and Wizardry Continual Light, which I was running with my local group, mostly with Harold, Steve, and Brian, the last year or so. Forbidden Lands brought me back to gaming after I retired, and then we were running Broadlands, Sword and Wizardry Continual Light for the most part, and loved it. And I have to step back and say, wow, nothing. Sword and Wizardry Continual Light, is the OSR that takes the procedures out of the way, but keeps us with our D20 understandable games and formula for how we fight and how we deal with certain things. But it removes the procedure blocks of combat, movement, etc. And at the same time, lets us level up, and lets us level up based on numbers of adventures, not XP, not treasure, right? I mean, there's so much that Sword and Wizardry Continual Light does right, that Brian and the guys were enjoying in my Broadlands campaigns. Get away from all that. I think we toyed a little bit with Sword and Wizardry Complete before all that came to an end. We were doing MERP. We were trying old games like MERP. The Lord of the Rings adventure game. We were giving some things a try, but we gotten away from it. And then, of course, so in discovering these minimalist games, it's allowed me to understand even more what I want players to be. I want players to be in space. I want players to act. I want players to declare. I want players to think like a character. Then it's a simple challenge. Oh, you need to make a brawn check to kick this door down. They just make a simple roll. Okay. Can we do that with D&D? We do it all the time. It's never a question, can we, or why aren't we, or what makes this better. It's not better. It is recognizing a level of flexibility and dynamism in the system, coupled with experience with the players and the people you're playing with, coupled with the comfort level of that thing. And then all of that comes together, in my opinion, with the perfect group, with the perfect system that you could run forever and not need another game, not need another set of dice, not need another thing. So why don't we do that? Great question, because that's what I really wanted to do. That's why I ran Basic Fantasy for 6 years. I did. I had my thing, right? And then I was in pursuit of taking a break from that, but getting a little simpler, but not forgoing rules totally. And of course, trying new games as a want of love of the hobby, right? So here I sit for 4:45 in the morning, and I say, trying to have my coffee before I leave, I'm reflecting upon why such praise for Warlock. Well, I think it's a great game. I think it's unique. I think it's a wonderful way to tweak another game system into D20. I think it lends itself to role play first, activate second. But you have to get your head around the number of skills, and you have to get players who are willing to play and not worry about asking for skill rolls, not demanding skill checks. And for the most part, decide whether the difference in combat is worth the stalemate, right? One thing about Warlock, there will never be stalemates. I'm okay in D20 with missing. As a matter of fact, to me, stalemates are a big part of a sword fight. You're going to have lots of sword play before somebody's actually affected. And so it's okay to miss, so to speak, in D20. We call it hit miss. Unfortunately, if we get away from that and we start looking at combat as you just didn't affect change on this round, type of thing. So anyway, and then there's some other issues I have with the leveling up in D20, which I've talked about on and off for years. Somebody who's been doing this for 35 years, I still am not a big fan of this escalation into more hit points. You go from early levels, which is survive monsters, into mid rounds, which is okay, I think we're capable now, this is interesting, to late rounds, let's go kill monsters. Late levels. So there's this sweet spot too of lethality and a level of trepidation in going on an adventure because it's dangerous and because you could die, but that's the goal, that's the joy, is finding out what's behind the stone door. Meanwhile, being so lethal that you have nothing invested, or being so heroic it's boring and dull. So I think there's also that sweet spot, right, of this thing. And so I look at games like IDW. There is no leveling up, so to speak. There is no real huge depth there. Your character only improves in his one special ability, which is generally like 2 attacks in a turn, or use your heal thing twice a day, or whatever the special thing is. But aside from that, their wounds and your competency in attributes never changes, right? If you choose to put 3 in brawn, you're going to be a decent melee combatant for your entire career. And wounds are wounds, right? So we know when you're on death's door because you have only one wound left, and that's what makes wounds great, because you're not wondering, will this one die roll kill me dead? You're hit. Okay, now I'm down to 3 wounds. I'm hit again. Oh, I'm down to 2 wounds. You can actually kind of prepare and see how the fight is going. You know that this is, as opposed to having 6 hit points and not knowing if they're going to roll an 8 or a 7 or a 6. So I want to talk about this because the simple question was, wow, sounds like you love Warlock. I usually love all the games I buy and read. I'm very much a positive person. I'm very much like to see people write and make good stuff for us to try. I think there's a lot about Warlock in the ease of play that is it's there fundamentally. But if it came down to me, again, Desert Island tomorrow, choosing, and I've talked about this, Eastmark as my favorite OSR, coupling the quality of writing with the quality of artwork, with the quality of production, with the flavor and atmosphere, it being an interesting amalgamation of 1E and D&D BX in its structure and in its rules and in its depth, but in that. But if it comes down to, what I want to play now and what I want to play indefinitely, and that would be campaigning or one-offs or a series of chronicles, whatever the case may be, it would be the simple D20. It would be that white box Sword and Wizardry Continual Light. It would be white box fantastic medieval adventure game. Or it would be basic fantasy. It would be something in which these procedures can be stripped away, right? This block of procedures that I just don't care about, right? I mean, you declare, what do you want to do? It's your turn to go. I want to draw my sword and run across the room and attack the skeleton. Okay, roll the dice. I don't want to get into the whole point by point block system. I want players to be in the moment with the sword in hand, wanting to save their buddy from the zombies. Right? Okay. Anyway, everybody out there, have a wonderful day.